This is Justice Worriers, a podcast where we think about things that are right and wrong in our world, and how Christian ideas can help us respond to them. We prefer hard questions over easy answers, and we'd love you to join us in our ramblings. Listen in, and contact us using the links in the show notes. Hello and welcome to Justice Warriors episode 71. My name's Andy and as usual I'm joined by Leah. Say hi, Leah.
Hi there.
And Jörg. Say hi, Jörg.
Hello.
And this time we're talking about a passage in the Bible, which is fairly unusual. Because I have the privilege of speaking to two people who on the same day both gave a sermon about the same passage in the Bible. And so hopefully have intelligent thoughts about it. Is that fair?
Yes.
Yeah,
and one of them was listen to Andy.
Yeah. I managed to make it to listen to Leah's sermon, and I have not listened to the recording of Jörg, so I'll need Jörg to summarise it when we get there. Mm. So the passage we're talking about is Jesus turning over the tables in the temple. And I want to start off with my immediate extreme irritation that I feel whenever anyone mentions that passage. Because for me, all this passage means is some youth leader somewhere standing up and saying, you see, Jesus wasn't a wimp. He was like, I don't know what, like really manly. He was really manly because he got angry and threw some stuff around. And he wasn't a doormat.
I read a commentary in prepping where somebody was actually making this argument. They were analyzing the fact that they tried to, this is in a different telling of the story in the Synoptic Gospels, that he went into town and they couldn't buy food, so they came back out, and then he went into town again the next morning. He was really famished. They were like analyzing the sugar levels and basically said,
so Jesus was hangry, basically.
He was hangry. It was all that, you know. He did, this is the beauty of God, you know, in humankind. It behaves like a man. So
right, yeah. So to me, it's just it's a kind of very wimpy man standing at the front, telling us all to be as wimpy as possible, and then saying, "Look, see, Jesus wasn't wimpy, and we can all be like real men, and still be Christians." And I don't know, that awakens a lot of negativity.
So masculinity issues is what we're talking about today.
Well, that's what I think.
There's quite a lot to unpack. So I had this vision of a really like macho youth leader, because often they were the ones who could run and lead the sports games and, you know, all that, and then standing in front of a load of gangly teenage boys, some of whom couldn't do all that sort of stuff, and, you know, trying to.
Yeah, maybe that too, but like just a general sense of like. We all know that you have to be kind of pathetic to be a Christian, but I am now saying that you don't, when everything else says that you do.
In this one very specific set of circumstances that we're all a bit unsure what was really going on.
Yeah. I think my initial reaction was even worse listening to you, and I realized that maybe there was a little bit of me wanting to be that youth leader, because I thought, hey, I've never preached on that passage. That's really cool. I wonder where the interpretation is going to carry me. Finally, like, put in a bit of radicality and like fire and brimstone against something, capital or whatever. And so, yeah, it was even more pathetic than that.
Well, it was the same for me. I sat down thinking that might be where my talk would go. Something, as you said at the beginning of your talk, about sort of delivering a bit of a radical call to arms, and yeah, mine didn't really go in that direction.
So I think it is interesting, like, if I can somehow get over myself and engage with something that God is angry about or passionate about, then that could be a helpful thing. So anyway, so shall I read the passage so that we can start talking about it?
Yes. Yeah.
Listener, we've done like zero preparation apart from writing two sermons, so this will be a sort of unplanned.
Yeah, who's the we in this?
Yeah. Okay, so let me read the passage. So I'm going to read it from the NIV, and it's John chapter 2, starting at verse 13. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then responded to him, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days." They replied, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you're going to raise it in 3 days." But the temple he had spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said. Then they believed the scripture and the words that Jesus had spoken. Now, while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, many people saw the signs he was performing and believed in his name. But Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. He did not need any testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in each person. All right, so where do we go? What's it all about?
Well, it's bonkers, the whole story. I mean, it's one place to start if you actually just try and understand what that would have looked like in the day. I mean, that's one place to start. We could also talk.
Why is it bonkers?
Well, because what he was disrupting was actually a very necessary part of temple worship at the time. Okay. So we're in Passover, biggest Jewish festival of the year. I was digging, so Josephus, who is a sort of near contemporary, a bit later than Jesus, claims up to 3 million Jews in Jerusalem for Passover. Mm-hmm. That's divided by 10 is closer to it. It was still a very small town, but 300,000 people coming in from all over the place, from Alexandria, from Syria, from Greece, and they need a festival. They need food. They need to be, there's lots going on. And so the first thing you do is you collect a bit of money, and that's already in Exodus. Everybody had to pay a flat tax, a half shekel. And in order to facilitate that, you needed to buy a temple coin, because otherwise it would have been complete mayhem. People come with all these different currencies. So there was a temple coin, which was the currency of about, 100, 150 years before that, which was minted in Tyre, in Phoenicia, so just a bit north of there. And so it was basically the money changers were there to facilitate that, that you could have a collect in all one denomination. And then the animals is also very clear, like if you come from everywhere, you can't bring your sacrificial animal. And, this could be large or small, from oxen to little pigeon. But they had to be unblemished, and none of those animals travels well in a bag. So you by facilitating a place in Jerusalem where you could do that, you enable people to participate in the festival, but to do the things that the Torah said. Plus, like we imagine the temple, this tiny thing, and then, all this animal noise gets in the way, but the whole thing was huge. Like even today when you're there and you look at the Al-Aqsa Dome, and like you look at this huge plateau, this huge aerial of the Temple of Herod, it was big. And all of this transaction was taking place in the court of Gentiles, where everybody could walk in, not the Jews. And then you would enter into a more tranquil space. So Jesus goes in there and kind of says, get all of this stuff out of here. It just disrupts the holy service. And it just, in my sermon, I basically said it's like he came into our church and just ripped out the sound desk. This is how dare you turn it into a media studio. Mm-hmm. Like something that's auxiliary, that's necessary, that facilitates is the thing he attacks. And actually a lot of commentaries, I don't quite agree with them, but they say, well, you can even see it like they can't find good Bible verses to say, and it said he would clean up the temple, other than zeal for your house will consume me. Like I found one commentator said, that's a pretty shoddy passage. I don't agree with that for different reasons we can unpack later. But it is a very enigmatic thing. This is also why most commentators think this must have happened. Like you don't invent this. Mm-hmm. So some prophetic act in the temple must have taken place. He got into some trouble. It's not clear that it was part of the Passover. So that's a whole other set of problems, and I'll shut up after that. When did it happen? The Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, put it in the lineup to the final Passover, Jesus' crucifixion. So you have the triumphal entry, big old, in the narrative arc, big old high, and then you have, on next day, he goes into the temple, hangry, as we already established, creates a lot of enemies, and then the high priest begins to plot and everything. So it's kind of
makes sense,
into that line.
He's making trouble, and then
he's making trouble.
Punished.
But commentators actually seem to think that that's already telling. It kind of fits too neatly in the story. John, on the other hand, takes that same story and puts it very much in the beginning as if it tells us something important about Jesus. That's something where I picked up my sermon. You're a more evangelical reader who wants everything to be like historically, like the video recording, they will argue it must have happened twice because it's one time it's told in the beginning, one time at the end. I would argue, no, actually, it's about the deeper truth of the stories that the Gospels are trying to tell. So these rearrangings are actually part of theological moves rather than, historical claims.
Right. And Leah, did you talk about the thing of like this was in the Gentiles' court and it was disrupting Gentiles from worshipping, and that might be something?
So I did touch on that. I think when I started thinking about the passage, that was a bigger thing in my head. But as I sort of read a bit and thought about it some more, that felt like, I think a little bit like when I first started thinking about the passage, I was thinking about the youth leader version, which is that, this was a terrible exploitation that was going on. Jesus was crossed, that there was a pollution of mixing some kind of, trading activity with Christian activity, and these two things should be kept separate, and that it was disturbing the worship, and it was particularly disturbing the worship of people who weren't Jewish. I still kind of brought that in a little bit to my talk, the thing about it being foreigners, but only kind of in passing, because it felt like actually what John was trying to say was, who is this Jesus? And that it was sort of one of a series of things at the beginning of John that were trying to show who Jesus was, rather than it being some sort of point making about commerce.
And what do you think it is saying about who Jesus was? Like, other than like someone who throws his weight around?
Well, I mean, the direction that I went in, and actually it was strange because I think Jörg and my sermons are very, very different, but I felt like they were actually quite, I don't know, they were kind of saying the same thing in different ways. I was really looking at power and what it means to be in the center of power, and the temple as a place that was a center of Jewish political power and administrative power of the day, and Jesus setting himself as a leader, but a very different kind of leader, and saying that there was a whole new thing going on with what it meant to be what it meant to be a follower. And I'm not putting it as well as I put it in the talk now, but help me out, Jörg. But because I think we were saying some of the same,
I think
some of the same things.
This is rule from weakness. I think that's or this sort of prophetic act from weakness that we both explored, and maybe can unpack a little bit more. I mean, to come back to the court of Gentiles, there is truth to that as a Gentile, you weren't allowed to enter or even perform a sacrifice. So Gentile means you converted to Judaism, right? You were a proselyte, but you weren't born Jewish. You weren't of Jewish heritage. So there were limits. And so one could perhaps make a sermon out of this that says, this is Jesus opening up to the Gentiles. I haven't seen a lot of commentaries going in that direction of of the historical critical side of things. So I'm not sure how much truth there is to this. And I don't see John claiming that. It's not John's way. He doesn't have that same kind of universalism. He pursues a different project that sounds a bit more like Luke's whole scheme which he then picks up and acts, from Jerusalem to the world. So it's a bit of a stretch, but it's an interesting thought to play with.
Those that died by wearing the badge, they're the chosen ones. Those who died are justified for wearing the badge, they're the chosen ones. The justified, those that died, they're the chosen whites.
So I'm just left incredibly curious now as to why Jesus did it. Like, the only explanation we have is stop turning my father's house into a market.
Yeah. Well, it's not the only one.
I think he was trying to set himself up as an alternative source of power and authority in the very centre of what stood for power and authority in his day. I think that was my reading of why he did it.
So just challenging, like, it could have been anything, right? He could have, like, I don't know, pushed over one of the tables in the Jewish court, or so, like, what.
So I'm almost coming at it from the other way, because I front load the sermon by saying my instinct, which we might now call youth leader instinct, of like preaching the radical message, because I'm normally wimpy, but now I can. That's very unfair to youth leaders. I used to be one. Maybe I was a wimpy one, but who knows? No, but this kind of like stepping into the radicalness, and that's how we imagine religious transformative projects take place. And I was really interested in what John was doing with it, because for John, it is the first public act of Jesus. So the only other things we have Jesus doing before that is calling his disciples, and like he's with that ragtag group of John the Baptist friends, right? So these are Essenes, these are people on the outskirts, the people who eat locusts, that's not anything that is seen. And then he's at the wedding to Cana, which is a private thing, and even his miracle there, he wants to hush, he doesn't want to talk about it, he doesn't want it to be known. It's just for his disciples, his mom to see. And this is the public act. So why is John putting it here? And what does he want to tell us about the way Jesus disrupts? So I was coming at it that way. I wasn't asking why Jesus did that, because I happen to think we can't know. Like, was he hangry? Was he doing, like, the story is so difficult for the Bible to integrate. So if you ask that way around, then there's a lot to discover in John actually saying interesting bits here about a different kind of rule breaking through. And then the other verses become also very interesting. And with the first motivation, Jesus, like the first part of my sermon, I kind of went and said, okay, John turns up the light gradually. The first explanation we get is the one from Jesus himself. Don't turn my father's house into a den of robbers is not the version here, into a market hall. Den of robbers is the one that Matthew and Luke used. It's also very interesting that John kind of softens it, right? He doesn't make that claim of cheating. So that point, I just kind of said, well, maybe the only thing I can think about here is accrual. Jesus thought there was something getting in the way of worship. So very much like Leah. And I did some geeky research there, and that was pretty interesting, because it seems to be that the selling of animals was very, very recent. It only was established in about 30 AD, the selling of the animals in the temple, that is.
Okay.
There was a different marketplace for animals across the Kidron Valley, like a stone's throw, basically, across the Kidron Valley from the temple up in the Mount of Olives is where you would normally pick up your sacrificial animals. In the year 30 AD, there's a split in the temple hierarchy. The high priest, who happened to be a Sadducee, Gamaliel, he appears in other parts of the scriptures. There seems to have been a conflict with the Sanhedrin, which was the sort of big judicial assembly, everybody who interpreted law. Those were mostly Pharisees. He throws them out of the temple, and they do a clever thing. They settle on the other side of the Kidron Valley, on the Mount of Olives, right where the animals are sold. And then the high priest says, we can sell animals in the temple. Right. So it's this kind of weird economic competition. And so you can see how actually there's more politics going on. And the same thing when you look at the temple coin, that's something that Jews couldn't really influence, but they didn't want to use Roman coinage. When the Romans came, like to have the head of the emperors circulated in your sacrificial coinage, that was even worse than the Phoenician coin. Now, the Phoenician coin was pure silver. It was like 97%. You know, it had this sort of right weight for half a shekel, but it also had Phoenician gods on it in depiction. So it wasn't ideal. But then they said, can we keep this coin rather than take yours? And the Romans said, yes, you can, but you mustn't change the mint. So you can even mint it. You can keep producing it, but it must look exactly the same. That'll be your temple coin from now on. So now the Jews are minting pagan coins for their sacrifice. So what that led me to think about this kind of deep dive was like, okay, like we need things to mediate our faith. And even as evangelicals, we do that, you know, through our music, through our singing, whatever. We always think we have this ultimate direct connection with God, but that's not true. We have all sorts of devices. and these devices accrue all sorts of politics. And it can be very healthy to have sort of disrupting cut there every now and again that says, hang on, what's actually going on here? Why are we minting pagan coins? Why are we battling about who gets to sell the doves? And that is one interpretation that I liked because I hadn't known about these things of why Jesus might have done it. But again, I think the other bits are much more interesting to ask, you know, what John does with the story. Sorry, that was me being totally geeky.
No, it was interesting. I like that sort of thing about something similar to that I kind of brought up about just the compromises that empire requires you to make. So yes. I did a little bit of looking at the story from the perspective of the traders and the fact that they'd have lost a day's takings and they'd have lost all their stock. And you know, who were these people? They weren't evil incarnate. They were the little people like us. They were the people just going about their business, trying to make a relatively honest buck and feed their families and how difficult it is in positions of all these political complexities and power struggles and to find a way to live that is honest and true, but that doesn't make too much compromise. You know, we are all forced into these little compromises that we all make, whether it's, you know, buying stuff on Amazon Prime or, you know, whatever it is, driving a Tesla. You know, there are all these little compromises that of necessity. You know, we've all got smartphones with
It's a very luxurious compromise, driving a Tesla.
Yeah, I know, that's not a great example, is it? But okay, everyone's got a smartphone.
Sorry, I had to pick that one up.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Everyone's got a smartphone with, you know, minerals in it from the from the Democratic Republic of Congo like and point. Stuff. You know, there's these little compromises, and how do you navigate them in a way that Jesus might have done?
Yeah, I picked that up in your sermon, and I thought that was it. That, again, you came from such a different angle and landed on that same spot. Like when you said, you know, like, just be quiet. It's fine. Let's just, you know, don't rock the boat. This is doing something good. And it's exactly that radicality of Jesus here that says, no, even the necessary stuff, even the good stuff, even the thing that facilitates your worship isn't pure. Mm-hmm. And every now and again, that needs a good scrub. It needs a good clean. And so it's a prophetic act in the best sense of the word, in that it is disruptive. It's not prescriptive. It's not like this is how you now shall live, but it's like it just puts a cut in a maximally provocative way to get you to think about, why am I even doing this? Why are we using these coins?
And think about how many fights there must have been in various churches that we've all been in and that exist in the world over whether the sound desk is too big and what sort of music we have and whether the band should stand on the stage or at the side. You know, there's all these things that sadly we sometimes die in a ditch about. And
here's Jesus doing the same thing, like coming along and saying, you know, like this administrative change.
And saying they don't really matter.
But no, he's not. He's saying this administrative change that has happened recently, if we're to believe Jörg, is like really deeply offensive to me, and I want them out of my temple.
Mm-hmm.
Right, he's doing that exact thing. He's saying, this thing's really important, and, I'm going to make a fuss. It's worth making a fuss over it and disrupting everything.
I didn't take your sermon that way. Maybe I misunderstood. I took it that it was the politics that Jesus was objecting to, not the one particular side that he was objecting to.
So obviously, but this is how theology works, right? We're trying to read into a passage something meaningful that we think accords with the personality of Jesus. Of course, we can imagine all sorts of different scenarios. But if Jesus was wanting to say, don't sell animals here, sell them outside, I don't see him making a prescription. He says, take them out, this is disrupting the service. But he doesn't go back to it. He doesn't say, this shouldn't happen this way, or this should always be the way. So if I read this as a sort of a prophetic act of disruption, it makes more sense than if I read it as a contribution to the political battles of the day. Now, that's a choice. You could say, Jesus is just participating in it. Fine. There are other reasons for why I think that may not be the case, because he actually doesn't, especially with John, he doesn't show interest in the actual temple. It takes, eye gets drawn away from there toward the suffering servant. And that's where the John narrative leads us to. It's not about the administration of the day. But I would argue in my sermon, that's probably the weakest point. It has a lot of a sort of circumstantial evidence to say, here's one plausible reading of it. What I liked about it is not just this sort of, not just the sort of mediating auxiliary tech that we need to attack. It's the fact that everything we do accrues politics. And I didn't dare to say it out loud, but, I was basically saying, in the Church of England, we have all these necessary debates about liturgy, about pastoral questions. And, I don't need to say LLF, but that's of course what I mean, or one of the possible things. And you think, I want us to have honest debates about it. But when you look at how then synodal tactics get played over this, and how, each side fears the other, and it accrues just simple politics.
So just for any listener who doesn't know, LLF stands for living in love and faith. Is that right?
Yes. And this is the process that essentially has forced all parishes to declare whether they will bless homosexual or non-heterosexual unions. Mm-hmm. And so every parish church must declare this, and it is a kind of tribalism, I think, in my view, that has emerged from this, because it has forced a lot of complicated conversations within parishes.
Okay, and then we're imagining what Jesus is doing here, not coming in and on one side and saying, you lot have got it wrong and you lot have got it right, but more like he's saying you're all hypocrites, like he says at other points, stop doing politics.
That's the way I was trying to lead this. I don't know if this is correct, but this is the thought that struck me, that I found interesting, is this all the necessary stuff we do in our faith. Again, the sheep were necessary, the money changing was necessary. All the necessary stuff we do in our faith is often very easily bound up with sin. It accrues politics around it. So what this is teaching us is that Jesus comes in and cuts against those politics.
I'm finding that really hard to accept, because it really looks to me like he went into one side and said to that side, this new thing you're doing is really wrong, right? If your story's right about it being a new practice.
Yeah,
but
I don't know what to make of that. It'd be much easier. Sorry, go on, Leah.
Maybe we should move on to the next bit, because the next bit kind of sort of sets continues in the direction that Jörg was just taking us, I think. So the next bit was very much about, unless I've leapt ahead, was about centering everything on Jesus. So
yeah, I had an interim step there, which
before,
I found interesting, which is that citation of Psalm 69.
Okay, do you want to go with that?
Psalm 69, this is the zeal of your house has consumed me. And this is where I found the one commentator I mentioned earlier saying, well, that's a silly quote of a passage. It's like the best thing you could find is this. Oh yeah, he's zealous for his father's house. But then if you read Psalm 69, and John does that a lot, John draws mostly on the Psalms rather than the prophets in his interpretation of Jesus' story. And Psalm 69 is so much about suffering, about somebody who's in dismay, that it was often read in the old church alongside the story of the Passion of Jesus. So one of the examples that I brought out in my sermon is verse 21. They put gall in my food and gave me vinegar for my thirst, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a story that's transported in all the Gospels, not just John, of Jesus getting vinegar or sour wine handed to him by the Romans as he's asking for thirst, like on a sponge, so he can drink. And even so, the passages that don't quote 69, like, have this. So this kind of parallelism between the suffering servant and that. So what John is giving us here is a clue. Is like Jesus comes in from a position of suffering, I'm going to be killed, of honesty. And the Psalm 69 is extremely rich. It has portions of, like, water's up to my neck. It has portions of guilt. You know, like, I've sinned so much that even those looking for you, God, may they not lose sight of you because of my sin. It has portions of helplessness. I've cried out for help and nobody's coming my way. So it has a lot of that kind of thing in there. So it's not, you read it, zeal for your house is consuming. You think, okay, there's a religious fundamentalist coming in on one side of the argument and saying, here's where we are. Mm-hmm. But actually, where that's pointing to is a suffering servant saying, like, I am doing this out of a place of agony, out of knowing about the depths of sin, out of not getting the help I need. I'm turning the tables because something just seems wrong here. And so in that sense, it hardens my earlier idea that Jesus is just attacking the way in which politics occludes transmission of the real presence of God through the things that we do. He's just like, it's suffocating. I'm coming here as somebody who can no longer take it. I'm not coming here as somebody who, and that then, takes you straight to liberation theology to say, like, if you want to attack suffering, if you want to speak out against the awful things we're seeing in the US, you talk about the children that are being arrested at ages of 2 and 5. You talk about the old man that's driven around in his underpants who was a US citizen and only like an hour later. You talk about the people that are getting shot. And you talk about that suffering and you say, something's not right. Something is suffocating. Something is killing. Whatever good you want to do is being killed by what you do because it causes so much suffering, right? So it's in that sense that I see that message strengthening. So
it's like a scream of just being overwhelmed by...
It's a scream of being overwhelmed, of being overwhelmed by sin, of being overwhelmed by the world. And of course, in Jesus' mouth, it's a scream of the future. And this is why it's so interesting that John puts it here. It says this is the first act, is that guy going into the temple and saying, stop you all. It is reeking to hell what you do. It doesn't make sense. It kills everything inside me, and it will kill me in the end.
And this connects me, Leah, with what I found really inspiring about your sermon, about the kind of, I guess it's like Jesus's passion, and like there's a, like a desire for change, and does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I sort of built, I put these two things alongside each other really, and went back through John a little bit about who Jesus had already shown himself to be as this, as a servant leader, as the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, and then contrasted it with this, I mean, horrible but absolute gift of a quote from Stephen Miller, which I'll just read you a short bit of it. So Stephen Miller's the Deputy Chief of Staff in the White House, and part of what he said is, we live in a world, in the real world, that's governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world since time began. And so then I went back to, in the beginning was the Word, was God speaking, was light in the darkness, a very different kind of version of what it means to have power, to be the being that created everything and yet not coming and imposing will upon people in ways that that we've seen in the US recently. So
and that is totally John, right? That is the message of John. It's that sort of, I mean, this is what some of my theology teachers in the 90s would always draw this parable. It's like God coming down into the world all the way to the depths of the grave in order to lift up the world. In the beginning was the Word, this co-eternal presence with God that becomes flesh and fully reveals God in order to bring everything up to him. So it's this totally opposite idea of power that doesn't come from above, that doesn't govern from above, that begins out of weakness, that starts as a baby, as a carpenter, as an outcast, as this suffering servant that turns over the tables because he has absolutely no power. And is, by the way, what's the next thing that happens? He's asked, by whose authority, by what authority are you doing these things? We don't recognize you. You're a dirty, smelly preacher that comes along. That's God. It's the revelation of God is exactly in that moment. And I think I find that inspiring. This is why John's theology is actually sometimes extremely good. It can be very from the top, but the founding principle is always this kind of, the story of Jesus is that God came down into this dirty, mired flesh of ours in order to redeem it from the inside and lift it up to him.
And who is the dirty, smelly outsider that is really God that we're ignoring? You know, who's the who are we treating badly because we've decided that they're not worthy, that they're not powerful, that they're not fit to be in the center of power, exercising authority.
Absolutely. If you're the priest, that's what you see. You see that migrant coming in and saying, or the drunk person coming in and saying, "Where's your God?" Really, like there's that disruptive presence of suffering that reveals the sin of the system in order to redeem it.
What I find really encouraging about it is the idea that we can resist by just saying, "No, that's wrong," right, and not. I don't know, maybe this is a problem that I have, right? But like I have this quite strong memory of Leah reading out that Stephen Miller quote and then saying, "And we disagree," or words to that effect. And I was like, "Oh, right. So we can just like say, no, that's wrong." And that's that like, and maybe that's kind of what Jesus is doing. As a weak person, I can still say, "No, that's wrong."
Yes. And it will sound foolish. It will sound utterly baffling to come out of your mouth, out of power, to challenge power this way. And I think this is exactly what's happening here. This is why it's irrelevant what side Jesus was on, because he wasn't being read as having any sway in this dispute where the animals were being sold. He wasn't recognized by the Pharisees. He wasn't recognized by the Sadducees. He was no one who just spoke out.
Right. Just said no.
And the next day, presumably, the tables all went back up again and it carried on as usual, right? Same day. There was nobody went, "Oh my goodness, we're doing the wrong thing here. We need to rethink," did they? As far as we're aware.
The really puzzling thing about the story is even like, there's nobody who says he got arrested, he got into trouble for that, right? Like even in the Synoptic Gospels, he slipped away. And so whatever this thing was, it wasn't that disruptive. It wasn't even powerful enough to attract the temple police. Like, you kind of think, or these stories weren't delivered to us, or what's going on. But, there is no sense that Jesus went to prison for that. Nobody makes that claim.
Right. So this is back to our discussion about like being a wimp or not, right? Like this is an expression of maybe an expression of power in weakness, but certainly an expression of resistance in weakness, or just a scream of anger in weakness, but it's in weakness.
Maybe that's how some of the early civil disobedience acts felt. We hear about the famous ones that gain momentum, like, the bus boycott or the lunch counter thing. But, I'm sure there were some people who just in their own hometown, a few people got together and did something, you know, and I'm sure that goes on in every one of these situations, you know, in colonialism, in apartheid, in, you know, that there are plenty of people who courageously just do something that might just feel to them like it's absolutely sort of pointless, but yet they did it out of a conviction that something had to be done, and they wanted to say, no, this is not. And maybe it should encourage us in our kind of, I don't know, sometimes I think, oh, what can we do? What can I best do to kind of impact this? You know, should I spend my time posting stuff on Instagram, or should I be giving money, or should I be joining this campaign or that campaign? And maybe it's like, just do something, just something. Doesn't maybe matter lovely. Whether it's super effective or not. Just we say, I think my line was, and we say no, you know, this is not how the
That's
world
better
runs.
Than what I said,
that was all it was. We say no.
Yeah, and I found it really inspiring.
This is not it.
Yeah.
I like that. And I mean, it reminded me, Leah, like, you know, March 1989 in St. Nikolai in Leipzig. That's what it felt like. You know, the same old bearded people in their student jeans hanging around, talking about peace and the environment, with Stasi spies among them, and you know that. And it's not going to make a difference. Like, with these guys, this ragtag band, no. And it just, And sometimes it turns into something. Sometimes it just means very, very little. Yeah. Like, a really encouraging thing that happened to me last week. I didn't find a way to connect it to the sermon, but this is actually an interesting thing to think about. I got an email from somebody in Ethiopia. It's like, is this you? Is this you, Jörg? I'm this little girl you used to sponsor, and I just looked you up, and I didn't know your name, but I recognized you from the picture. I'm like, okay, is this some scam? Who's this? And we did sponsor a little girl, and it was like one of the was a pretty harrowing experience of field work. Harrowing is the wrong way of putting it, but just uncomfortable, because I went to visit her, and we went with the care worker who was looking after this, and she was the city woman, and we went into the slum. It's a really funny picture of like walking after her across rubbish bins and in her high heels, and then visiting this family that grew up in a house that was sort of the size of our tiny, tiny bathroom, more or less, you know, just a bed. And this girl then was 5 years old. We colored a little bit. And then we just got these cards. And they were very, you know, oh, your Christmas card, this is what we're doing. I'm in school. I want to be a doctor one day. And it just felt so formulaic. And we sent a couple of letters back and forth. We sent a picture, and then we kept giving money faithfully, but I just didn't think, I didn't like the interaction. It was weird. It was very much the Wessie coming in, West German coming in. And so when she contacted me, she's now 25, she said, oh, you know, you guys, this is, like, my mother kept talking about you. She forwarded us the photograph of Emma as a baby we sent her. So they kept it all these years. And you kind of think,
wow.
I was being cynical about this whole thing. I thought this makes absolutely no difference. We're just doing a duty here. And she's not a doctor, but she works at a steady, good secretarial job, is doing her master's now, and still remembers this as a kindness of a stranger who weirdly spoke Amharic. And I said to her, I remember you as a timid little girl. And she wrote this beautiful paragraph where she said basically, yes, the timid little girl is now a 25-year-old woman because life has taught me that I must be brave. And I just thought, it's just amazing. I was, you know, I had nothing to do with that, but I was somehow part of that story in real life and in her mind. And so sometimes we just don't know what comes out of these tiny acts that feel like they change nothing. You know, how often I went over, and we've talked about this kind of distance coming back to the West. And, you know, the fact that I write about these things and I get a good academic career and whatnot. But it's not all the Stephen Miller story. There's stuff that happens underneath, and sometimes we don't want to see it. It's It's beautiful. Yeah, thanks, Leah. That helped me connect those two stories, actually.
Yeah, like it's not meaningless, and it is like any form of like resistance, and no matter how flawed, like, you know, potentially it could be accused of being so flawed, couldn't it?
Yes.
Maybe that's part of Jesus's message, that it is all a bit, it is all a bit flawed. And I don't know if we're going to get there, if I'm getting there too early, but the end verse really stuck with me that, you know, Jesus knew what's in men's hearts and women's hearts.
And
he knows
that's
what
exactly
humans are about.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, I totally agree with you. And I actually started there because I wanted to check my own impulses to change the world. And in how you laid out the story, you know, like we kind of want to think, okay, it makes no difference today, but tomorrow it will change. Like we give ourselves responsibility for the world, right? And then we think it only matters if in the end it leads to that. And no, the kingdom of God is always in the small thing. It's because it's the story, it's the principle, it's the little bits that don't work in that Stephen Miller way.
Yeah, you're back at Julian of Norwich and her nutmeg or whatever it was.
So I was listening today to an extremely critical review of the book Sapiens by that guy whose name I can't remember.
No, Yuval Harari?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And one of the there were lots and lots of criticisms about like whether any of the scientific stuff was correct and all that stuff. But one thing they were talking about towards the end was why the kind of billionaires are really keen on this book and on him. And the big criticism they had, which I thought was really interesting, it connects with what we were just saying, is that he, through his writings, including things like that book, he allows people to feel that they're doing something good by like pursuing knowledge and science and technology, like that they're eventually they're going to save the world, and allows themselves not to worry about the fact that right now what they're doing is destroying lives and hurting the world. And that feels like that connects to me very much with the kingdom of God is here, and the things we're doing right now are the only thing we can do to resist.
Yeah, agree. And that's what Empire will tell you, won't it? That resistance is futile, that every little thing you do, no one's noticing, no one's paying you any attention, none of it makes any difference. Don't even bother, just, as we said, keep your head down, live an easier life. None of this heroism is actually worth it.
I saw some graffiti from somewhere where there are protests against ICE in America, and it just said, "We are winning." And I thought that was, that's exactly the kind of like resistance of the message of like this overwhelming force, and there's nothing you can do about it.
And this week we shouldn't forget Iran as well. The courage that people have been showing there for many, many years, resisting an evil regime. People have done all sorts of incredibly courageous things, haven't they, over time? And every now and then a story will come out, and you're just like, oh boy, wow, wow.
Yeah, there was a moving set of stories yesterday, was it? About like people refusing to bury bodies, also because they're afraid, or these whisper networks of doctors that run sort of underground clinics, and what they're reporting, or people just at the risk of their life just transmitting news out. And we always imagine us in this kind of hero position, right? That the one thing we can do is going to change the world, but what people actually do is just do a tiny, tiny bit in the name of, I'm done with this. This is suffocating me. People who post pictures, parents who've lost their kids, and they're like, you can take me tomorrow. I have nothing to lose anymore. I'm going to post this picture. I'm going to make sure it gets out. I will show my face on it. And it's like, there's this sort of, like a shining through of humanity is this, I'm like, no. I'm life. I'm choosing life. Even that means you might kill me. I'm choosing life. I'm not going to live this way. And I feel that is the story that is at the heart of Jesus as well. I don't even want to universalize and say this is the Christian story, but I think this is exactly what Christianity points to, is that there is a different kind of life that can come from resisting, even to the point of being killed. Because that builds something new that you can never build with empire, that no house can build. And, that's where John then goes with Jesus' response to them. He's like, I'm not playing your game. This isn't about the temple. you tear this thing down, I'm going to build something different.
Is it the same John that writes Revelation?
No.
Maybe not. No, someone different.
We don't really know. So there's possibly connections. I mean, they're both quite late. So John is the latest gospel. And then the Apocalypse of John is even later. Early 2nd century.
I'm just thinking it's quite a similar message to Revelation, you know, those who overcome, those who stand fast to the end. And I think I've read various commentaries that's a lot less passive than we might take the words to mean, you know, that it's kind of an active resistance.
It's not just fighting off the mark of the beast, yeah. But I mean, this is where then, like, when you read on in the passage, you know, there's kind of confrontation where Jesus kind of says, this is what it's all about. Or John then helps us to see this is the temple, is his body. And what I'm taking this to mean is we're replacing the logic of the edifice with the logic of life. You know, that sort of fragility, and yet trusting in God's power to create life out of even death. And that's something like temples are for longevity, you know, resisting decay, never falling down. Whereas life doesn't operate that way. Life is all about recycling, about like giving back to the earth and new life coming from it. I mean, I'm not even like, I'm just talking general philosophy. We can be a lot more Jesus, you know, it's a resurrection story here, because I think we need that as a hope. But even philosophically speaking, it's like the replacement of the logic of the safety and the security of the house, the big temple. He says, tear this down and I will build it up. What he means is his body. Let go of the institution, let go of the edifice, and look to life. And so in that sense, in my sermon, I go on a longer side note, which is probably not necessary, but I felt I had to go there, of supersessionism, because we sometimes say, you know, Jesus replaces the stone-built temple with the true life and the direct connection with God. And I think in some ways, it's actually just reorienting back to what it was always about. God working through the patriarchs, through individual lives and their struggles, and is kind of re-commemorating that this is what it was all about. And Jesus then opening it up to everybody else, being grafted into that same story of God's salvation through people, through history.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did that, because I went back over my talk and I thought maybe I'd fallen into that trap a little bit, so kind of edit it. Because I think the contrast isn't between the Old and the New Testament, and I think I was just brought up in a church that was steeped in Old Covenant and New Covenant and all that, you know. But actually, it's like the difference between nature and an institution, isn't it? There's something crippling about institutions. Their ability to kind of continue to control and protect their own interests, and kind of ever kind of accrue power and, you know, morph into something that's more and more. They kind of is able to continue on beyond the life of the individuals who might have founded it, and take on a life of their own. And by institution, you could read church, you could read government, you could read corporations. You know, they all have this ability to kind of continue on in a certain direction and maintain a status quo, as opposed to nature, which has this cyclical thing that you were just explaining. So I think that was the replacement. It was a person. It was something natural. It was something.
Yes.
Something ultimately destroyable. You know, institutions are quite hard to destroy, aren't they?
And this is the thing. It's a difference between a mechanistic view.
Yeah.
And causality and security and safety. And this is the other thing that occurred to me, and it's linking back differently now as we talk about it, is this wager on the future. Like Jesus is wagering on the future. He says, you destroy this thing, I will build up. He means his body. And this is what life is. We're constantly like mortgaging what comes our way. And I might do something tonight. I might study. I might prepare for tomorrow, but I don't know if tomorrow comes. Like life is that risk. You know, we have to live it as if we're going to be here for a long, long time, but we may be taken away. So everything we invest, yes, I got there in the end, Andy. The talking point about that. But
I hadn't even noticed. Thank you for.
I hadn't even noticed. Interesting. But it's just, that's what it is. It's like as you said, Leah, it's the fragility, but there's a beauty in that because we don't know. We have to trust. We have to let sort of some residue come toward us, and buildings are not about that. They are about safety, security, shutting out.
But this is so scary.
It is.
This is so terrifying that you're talking about replacing like this building which represents our safe identity. Like we exist because this building is saying that and saying no, just replace it with something that just fades and dies away and gets replaced by something else. And like it really.
But that's a myth. But it's a myth that the building brings you safety. It feels like it's going to bring you safety, and in actual fact, it destroys us.
But isn't it a myth that we have absolutely bought into? Like, so myself, particularly myself, right? So we talked before about like progress, right? And in my mind, part of progress was this like building the rules-based order in the world, right? And this structure that means that we can do better in the future than we've done in the past. And it feels true and also terrifying that that's not the way it works. Like we weren't actually building something that was going to be like going to work, because that's not the way things work. It's always people.
I mean, it worked for a while, and there were some good things about it. It's just never going to be the actual answer to everything.
Yeah, and buildings don't work without people. I think that's the point. Like buildings are nodal points to people. Like we are just tenants at all the institutions that we're participating in, and people tomorrow will change it. So in some ways, there's a healthy way of investing in the future about buildings. If we don't think these things are forever going to stand the way they are, they're connecting points toward others. I was sitting tonight in my college chapel for a particular reason, and I was just thinking of all the people who were gathered there and how this thing just connects and how it acquires different meanings every time I'm in there for different reasons. And it doesn't do that by itself. It's not the building. It's the people that fill it. Yeah. And in a later point in time, I will have absolutely no connection with that anymore. And other people will fill it. And so in some ways, it just facilitates exactly that cyclical rebuilding. So it's not saying institutions are always bad. But if we think the institution in its unchangeability, in its edifice, and its edifice nature is the thing that we need to protect, then we're just talking about a cruel. But if we understand it as a connecting space of a story that keeps rolling on, and this is what Christianity is for me, like keeping that story alive of new life coming, of expecting something from God, of crying out for the just and saying, this is not it. That all of this stuff we've been talking about, right? That's a story. That's an attitude. And if a building can facilitate that and the traditioning of that, so be it. But it will keep changing. I don't have control over it. I can put as many crosses on the wall. Somebody will read them differently tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think I was just going to say, and it just makes you realise that when you don't take that approach to institutions, then so much damage is done in the name of them, right? So think of all the people who made what they probably thought were, divinely led decisions to protect the Church of England or the Catholic Church in the face of horrible, horrible allegations, because they were protecting the institution rather than protecting the people. And that's obviously so wrong, but kind of you can see the logic of it for people if you do think of the institution first rather than that the way that you've just beautifully described it.
Yeah, if you think you've built this thing which has value and protects you, then you want to protect it. Yeah. But what a turnaround to say that, the thing, as far as we have built a thing, it's built out of people and it's built for people. And so like,
it's an interface.
And it's the same with the rules-based order, right? It turns out that only happens if people buy into it. And it falls apart if the people are not forming it.
Yeah, you can't make a constitution hard enough that will withstand people no longer wanting it.
We thought you could, but... Oh.
Yeah, but is that a hint of British triumphalism against written constitutions?
Turns
that I'm
out we were right
there?
after all. Again.
You just didn't win.
Yeah, no, interesting. No, I think I think we've further developed our...
interesting.
It is interesting.
And Andy now doesn't have to go back and listen to my sermon. He's got it unpacked.
Oh, well, yeah. It'll be unsatisfying now. Yeah, it reminds me of your vision, Leah, when you sat outside church and thought about the people.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as well.
That was so powerful. Maybe it was good to recall it for the listener who doesn't want to go back to episode 53 or whatever it was.
Whatever it was. Yeah, it was just a day when I was really struggling with being in church and I always went out and stood and sat outside, and there's that really notable kind of, it's a sort of like a bench, isn't it, that's actually part of the church. It's the way that the front of church is, and it's a big old bit of stone that's been there for a long time and very much part of the building, but you can sit on it quite comfortably. And just had this vision of all these people coming and going through church through the ages past that same doorway, and how some of them will have had amazing kind of encounters with God. Some of them were just going there to be seen in their finery. Some of them kind of sort of crawled in quietly at the back and hoped nobody noticed them. And in some ways God will have spoken, and in some ways people will have spoken, and it's this whole continuity of people coming and going, and God's still working, and in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways that we might not expect.
Yeah. And I mean, when I preached the sermon the second time, this kind of revival language came to mind. And I don't know, I think it's time for a reclaiming of the idea of revival away from this, like, bring everybody into the building so you can stamp them with the same stamp and they do the same thing and build the same thing. What would it look like to revive the building in such a way that it becomes that connecting space, right? Between all these factionally different oppositions. What would it be for the church to be revived because you can bring your weakness, your vulnerability in every Sunday? Revived meaning you can be as you are, you can live. You're not suffocated by a message that has to fit, but you can just bring it that way. And also then revival in this kind of expectation that that is what life is. It's the little bits. It's that Ethiopian kid that suddenly writes to you and says, I've kept your picture all along. This kind of stuff where you think, like, wow, there's life I didn't expect.
Yeah.
Like, why is that not the kind of revival we're talking about? Like church coming back to the center of what really matters, of bringing people together, whether for their fineries, but just holding a village and not like raising up a temple of particularly enlightened villagers who then meet there and say, until you become like us, we don't consider you revived. So like, it's just, I really, I don't know. That's what happened to me in the sermon previously as well, where I just felt like reclaiming language in a different way of just repentance, revival, conversion, away from this 19th century individualism and toward this larger picture of life.
I was trying to do something a little bit the same. I talked about abundant life.
Yes.
So why did Jesus come? And this picture that John's building up of why Jesus was here and what he was trying to do. And that come, that you have life and life abundantly. And I purposefully tried to say nature is abundant, but nature is abundant in scary ways as well as, it's not just the cuteness of it. It's this, it's the frightening mountain. It's the beautiful lamb that's going to end up on your dinner plate at Easter or whatever. It's these raw things about life that I think abundance encompasses that this kind of,
and life encompasses that.
This is life
like the
in all its
preciousness.
messiness. Let's not let's not take a version of life that's either so sanitized that pretends that we all agree and pretends that we all think the same things and want to do the same things every Sunday. Let's leave space for the fact that some of us love singing endlessly and some of us don't, and let's say that's okay. And let's
so revivify
that
in that sense, right? in that messy sense of life. And not in this kind of like, oh, some youths have told us in one survey, although we can't see it yet, that they are coming back to church. I mean, it just, I'm sorry, this quiet revival stuff is another sort of really puzzling thing.
John had an interesting take on that, because he said he actually has seen a fair few people that he knew from secondary school with putting videos up of being baptized in various churches. So he did feel that it was a thing, but then he did say they were the same people who were posting reform stuff on their feeds. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I'm not sure how representative.
And I mean, when you dig into the statistics, it's not that clear cut at all.
Yeah, more or less pulled it apart, I think. I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
More or less
did they? Okay, that's great.
You have to find the episode. Yeah, they said
I need to go back to this. I read some statistics when it first came out. It was so clear. It was market research. But it's interesting, sorry, just to come back to this thing with reform. I mean, if we think that that's the idea of revival, you see in what kind of trouble you can get yourself by basically saying, okay, we have a very narrow sense of what it means to bring people back to this institution, and you're kind of losing the bigger picture of what else is happening in society. And this is exactly the story of evangelicalism in America. It's become a partisan institution by a large proportion of it. It's more complex than that. But this kind of tribal Christianity, it just breeds a kind of politics that I don't want to be part of.
So steering us back to a slightly more hopeful conversation that we were just about to really land nicely on.
Yeah.
I think the thing about what you said, Leah, when you said we say no, was that I'm always looking for, like, is there a way that I can be part of this thing? And that feels to me like I can, like, wholeheartedly be part of something like that. And so and I'm allowed to be included. That's very much part of that thing. And so, yeah, this thing of like revival or just that the institution is us and that we are weak and ethereal, like, potentially makes a space for me to be included, which is maybe why I found it so encouraging.
There you go. Message.
There you go.
Job done.
Yeah, Andy wrote to me afterwards that it was a very Christian sermon. I wasn't quite sure which way to take that, but I decided it was positive.
There was so much Jesus. That's good.
Yeah, it was funny. It was weird. It was one of those talks that I sat down to write it not quite knowing where it was going to go, and it kind of went somewhere. Which is kind of cool.
I had no time to think about it. And normally a thought dawns, and then I thought I was going to do, and then I started writing, and all this frustration about evangelicalism poured out of me first. Which some of it I stayed in, and I said, like, I want to be honest, like, I don't, I want to turn tables because something doesn't feel right. So is there something for us to learn here, how we can hold on to the faith? And it can be different. It can be vivifying, can feel like fresh water in your face and not somehow sort of channeled and carefully controlled.
Yeah.
Right. Is there anything else we need to cover from this passage, or do you think we've done it?
No. On to John 3. Nicodemus and conversion.
All right.
But here's the interesting thing. Nicodemus doesn't convert, does he?
No, that's true.
Haha.
There we go.
There you go.
On that cliff edge,
Cliffhanger.
we will leave you. Yeah.
I feel like we're over-promising now, because I think it's extremely unlikely we'll move on to that.
Oh, we were going to do an episode on conversion at some point.
Oh, we could definitely do conversion, couldn't we? Yeah, so we're going to continue, listener, probably with ideas that we want to revisit or question or reinterpret. So hopefully we'll be back at some point with more of this. I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you, Jörg. Thank you, Leah. See you next time.
Killing in the name of
You've been listening to Justice Warriors. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also follow us on social media by searching for Justice Warriors, where warrior is spelt like someone who worries about things. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating, since that helps other people find us. Also, please tell your friends about us in real life. We'd love to hear from you. To get in touch, use the email address in the show notes or contact us via the social media links. Thanks for listening.
Now you do what they told you. Now you do what they told you. You can't